Surprised that went that well. What's going on, guys? Brandon here from Gearist. Today we're going to be taking a look at a shoe that is a sequel to a shoe we've previously taken a look at. However, the naming convention changes up a little bit, and that is the Saucony XODUS ISO. This shoe right here, which, if you remember, is part of the XODUS line following this guy, the Saucony XODUS 6.0 right here. Now, while they're still very, very similar shoes, there's a lot about this that is different. So, let's get into talking about it. As we do with most shoes, we're going to first start with the outsole, and this is one of the places where we see the most changes between the versions. To start with, the material of the outsole has gone from being Vibram rubber, which we can see here in this shoe, to being Saucony's proprietary Power Track rubber right here in this shoe, which Saucony labels as super tacky. I'm assuming not in that kind of t-shirt tuxedo kind of way. Now, while I have certainly found more tacky rubber on trail shoes out there, which I have talked about in other reviews, if you want to see some of those, please subscribe. This is a definite marked improvement over the previous iteration, where this really shows up on some of those flat rocks. Flat rocks are those places we really discount for needing a lot of traction, but I have found that when flat rocks get enough of an angle, that's where you're really going to notice the material doing more of the sticking and not the lugs, and that is certainly the case in the shoe. Now, while some tackier rubbers can sacrifice a little bit of durability, I have noticed that on this guy, it is not the case at all. I've got about 45 miles in the shoe, and to be honest with you, there's very little wear, a lot of dirt, as you can see there, but very little wear. In fact, there's some of the finer detail on the lugs, some of that knurling and hashing that actually remains even after those miles. Another one of the big changes to the outsole is the layout, which is quite obvious here. We can see this here in version 2 and this one in the OG. Now, in this version, Saucony seems to be incorporating what they consider to be their Tri-Flex layout. Now, it's not labeled as such on their website, but if you look at their other shoes that do incorporate Tri-Flex, it looks pretty much exactly like this. Now, the midsole of the Saucony XODUS 6.0, which is this guy right here, that was one of the highlights for me, and it remains so in this shoe with a little bit of addition. Now, in case you're wondering, did the midsole material change at all? No, it did not. This material remains Saucony's Power Grid foam, which actually gives kind of a road-like feel even on some really, really rough trails. However, the technology which is different is the addition of a top sheet of Everrun. Now, Everrun is Saucony's TPU foam. It's that white stuff that you can see right there. It's a sheet that runs the entire length of the midsole, just under the sock liner, right above that midsole there. This is Saucony's TPU foam, a lot like Adidas Boost foam and some other materials that are out there. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit more in the ride section, but let me just say for now that people looking for a little more response from this shoe, especially those that complained about it being heavy and clunky, are probably going to like this addition. Now, there is no rock plate in the midsole of the shoe, sitting anywhere in the 24mm stack height and the heel 20mm for a 4mm net drop in the midsole of this. There's no rock plate, but being that these are some really beefy and quite deep lugs, you're not really going to notice it. And even on more technical terrain, I didn't notice it at all. Something that I mentioned I would have liked to have seen in Saucony XODUS 6.0 in my original review was a little bit more flexibility in the shoe. But this shoe right here has got it. It's not a huge flexy shoe like the Peregrine or the Kinvara or something like that. But as you can see, even through the midfoot, there's a good amount of flexibility in there. And for such a beefy shoe, this is a really welcome advance. Now, this does come in the form of kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, if you're looking for more flexibility, more operational room for the foot to be a foot, then you're going to have it. At the same time, you're going to lose a little bit of that pop because it's not going to have that stiffness that you can really hammer down on. However, it works out in the long run, as I think the trade-off really comes out to be kind of a wash. I mean, this is a shoe as opposed to more speed-oriented shoe that's going to really be able to get in there and just rack off the just long, steady miles that you're going to want to get training for an ultra or something like that, whereas you wouldn't necessarily need that or get that in a more speedy trail shoe. I should also say that this is a shoe that right out of the box did not, for me, seem to need any break-in period. I don't know whether that's a kind of a feature of the midsole foam, that Power Grid foam, or if it's a byproduct of the feeling that I got from that Everrun material. But either way, didn't need a break-in period. Moving into the upper of this shoe, this is where the Saucony XODUS ISO gets its namesake from Saucony's Isofit system, so it is definitely one of the parts that stands out most about this shoe. We have seen that Isofit system in other shoes in Saucony's line, and this is no exception, and I really like it as a welcome addition to this shoe, giving some stability on the trails. From the outside, this does appear to be one single piece piece of mesh pieced together laying over that foot. However, internally there are a few seams. We've got the ones right up here around the collar. We've got one down where the vamp is, but these are all very smooth, laid out seams that aren't really going to scratch the foot up or anything like that. I did a few sockless miles. Now, I do not run sockless, especially on trails. However, if you're a die-hard, just kind of barefoot in the shoe runner, this should not be a problem for you. The Isofit system, generally speaking, means that this is one piece of mesh-ish kind of stitched together, as I mentioned a second ago, but then it's overlaid with this cage right here that we can see. You can see these kind of things coming up like this, and those are going to make this basically isolated fit, or Isofit, if you will, that's going to really surround that foot and cradle it in there. With that being said, there is no gusseted tongue per se, because again, the tongue is part of this single piece of mesh construction on the upper, so it doesn't necessarily need to be gusseted. The external portions of the upper, that Isofit system, as we can see here, starts off with these overlays kind of around the heel counter here, and then again springs up into these 3 on each side, this cage system, which is what the Isofit system is all about. And as you can probably guess, it's one cohesive system, so it's not necessarily just these, it's not necessarily just that booty, it's the whole thing as a whole that makes up the Isofit system. On the toe of this shoe, we can see this toe shell. It says toe shell right there. It's going to form actually a pretty beefy toe cap. It's going to keep your foot pretty protected. I mean, yes, if you kick something toe first as hard as you possibly could, you're going to feel it for sure. But this does a nice job of keeping out those general bumps and bruises that you're going to have along the trail. Moving into the back of the shoe right here, we can see a very rigid heel counter system that goes up the back here. I mean, this is really very rigid. Some people are going to like that, some people not so much. It doesn't really bother me one way or the other. I felt like it kept the heel nice and in place, and things were, you know, even on off-camber, things didn't slide around too much. I put miles in the shoe that were in a wide variety of terrain. It went from dry and hot and dusty to muddy terrain to snowy terrain and all kinds of things in between. And every which way that I threw something at this, it held up really well, both the outsole and that upper, because a lot of times, you know, you'll have this beefy outsole here that's going to do really well, but then you get to the upper and it's like, oh, it's this delicate flower that you don't want to tear up or anything like that. And this held up very well. Seems very soft, feels very good. It's actually quite breathable, but it still held up like the way you would want something on a pretty beefy trail shoe to do. Now, I've talked a little bit about the Isofit so far, so let's talk about the fit of the shoe. Number one, it does fit true to size. For me, my size 11 is a size 11. It's the same as it is in all Saucony shoes for me personally. It does only come in a standard medium width, so if you do have a wider foot, I would probably give it a try actually, because there's quite a bit of play in the laces and in this cage system up here. That Isofit system does allow for some expansion like this. So apart from the fact that your foot might spill over the outsole a little bit, kind of around in here, this doesn't actually have too much restriction. Now, again, if you have a super wide foot, probably not going to work, but worth a try. Starting at the rear of the shoe, as I mentioned a second ago, this heel counter is super rigid. I don't really have too much feeling about it one way or the other. However, I will say that it definitely adds a little bit of weight that might not be necessary. I mean, there seems to be enough internal structure to not have to have this, you know, half an ounce or so of plastic material on the outside here. As I mentioned in the midfoot here, we've got the bulk of the Isofit system, which comes into play, hugs the foot nicely, doesn't lock it down too hard and feel constricting. It just really attaches the foot well in kind of this harmonious way from the foot to the shoe. Across the metatarsal heads right here, there's plenty of room. I was very, very comfortable, felt plenty of foot splay underneath me, but when I got up here, that toe splay didn't really go. Now, I'm not saying that this is anything outside of a standard shoe in the toe box area, because it's not. It fit just like a lot of other shoes. However, as I would like to see in most shoes, it would be nice to have a little more lateral edge right here just to allow that foot to splay a little bit more. In the previous iteration, the Saucony XODUS 6.0, I felt like the clunkiness and kind of the beefiness of the shoe really belied its ability to just go after some agility-needing trails. I mean, it really handled things better than I was expecting it to do, and that remains one of the highlights in this shoe right here for me. As the most aggressive trail shoe in Saucony's line, you would probably expect this to be able to run over some really ugly stuff, and it indeed can do that, but it's also ready to just kind of hop around and go from this rock to this rock, and pretty much whatever I could throw at it, it dealt with very, very well. While it's definitely not a super speedy shoe, I did have all the confidence I felt like I needed no matter the trail conditions that were underfoot. That Power Track rubber right here and that Tri-Flex system, which again isn't labeled as Tri-Flex necessarily by Saucony in this shoe, did a great job of sticking both on flat things as well as angular things. It basically overall just handled pretty much anything I wanted it to. Now, because of that increased flexibility, it did, as I mentioned a second second ago, lose a tiny bit of that pop. However, because of that Saucony Everrun top sheet, I really feel like it kind of made up for that. One final thing that I should mention is that this shoe right here, the Saucony XODUS 6.0, tipped the scales at 13 ounces in my men's size 11. Now, this is something that I noted, I kind of mentioned and complained a little bit about in the first version. I, again, mean that it belied a little bit of its agility, but this guy right here has shed almost 2 full ounces per shoe. This right here comes in at 11.2 ounces in my men's size 11, which by no means is a featherweight shoe. However, the amount of weight lost in this, I don't really know where it came from, but I will take it. At $130, this is kind of falling in line with the general uptick in running shoe prices that I have noted of late, but it's not super expensive. For such a burly trail shoe, I would expect something to be around that price, especially for something that is notated as the most aggressive shoe in Saucony's line. Now again, that price has been out for a bit, so definitely check the links down in the description of this video, or if you're on Gearist.com, be sure to check through our Amazon link, click that banner on Amazon, or on our website, you can go through to Amazon. They've definitely got it cheaper by now, so it's worth a look. This is really a badass trail killer, and you know, with the construction and the way that it's put together, it's certainly going to be a shoe that should be able to take you through quite a bit. Guys, before we get to our question of the day, please help us out by going to Gearist.com, clicking that Amazon banner that you see right there. That helps us out so much. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please share youtube.com/Gearist, share Gearist.com, all of the social media, Instagram, Gearist, Twitter, The Gearist, Facebook, Gearist, everything. Share everything. We want to hear from you too. info@Gearist.com, or just leave a comment down in the comment section below. And now our question of the day for you guys. That is that I just talked about a shoe that has really evolved and has made a dramatic weight change. For me, you know, 2 ounces is a large chunk of that shoe. It's almost 20%. What is a shoe where you noticed some things that were a big change for the positive, but you still yearn for some things from a previous version? Please let us know your answers down in the comments section below. Guys, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us today. If you've got the time, like and favorite this video, share this video with your friends. Thank you again so much for all your tireless support of Gearist. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you next time.